We'll start off with an intro from Yehuda Ben Zion, just to tell you all where we're at with this idea and where we might be going next. And then we'll have 4 very exciting talks, and then we'll keep on talking and discussing afterwards again. So Yehuda, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter, and thanks everyone for showing up on early, what day is it today? Sunday morning, for this workshop. So data from the immediate vicinity of fault zones are essential to develop next generation models for earthquake processes as well as seismic ground motion, as will become clear, I guess, in my very brief presentation and the talks you will hear later. So in early 2021, several of us from SCEC, IRIS and UNAVCO got together and started an initiative to develop Rupture and Fault Zone Observatory. This is a slide from 2 years ago, so it has been modified since then, but the essential aspect of this observatory is that it consists of a mixture of sensors that straddle the immediate vicinity of fault zones and fill gaps that are left if I showed you the regional network. So just the immediate vicinity is really naked and empty. And the idea that the particular mixture of sensors, the locations, all of this remains to be worked out in this and future workshops. But the basic idea is that these arrays of sensors will provide fundamental data that will be useful in the long interseismic period. I'll point with my hand. This doesn't work. In the long interseismic period, where the sensors are just sitting there, waiting for the next big earthquakes, as well as during the final preparation processes that lead to earthquake ruptures that we will be able to capture if we are sitting in this environment. Many things during the rupture, post-rupture data, and surprises, because this environment is really untested, unexplored, kind of. So what are we, a bit more specific, what do we expect to get? So we realize these arrays are going to sit for a long time there, and they will be very, very useful in the interseismic period while we are waiting for the next big earthquakes that are all overdue in Southern California. What this array, and also extension of it further to the north, to Northern San Andreas Fault, Hayward Fault, and some other structures will do, they will provide very high resolution models in the immediate vicinity of the fault zone that upon integration with the regional models, and now we have methodology to do this, will give us very detailed multi-scale models that will improve earthquake location, focal mechanisms, inversions of slip, but also, as I will highlight in my next slide, these multi-scale models will be essential for improving simulations of ground motions from faults to cities and other critical sites. Also, while we are waiting for big earthquakes, as will become clear maybe in the talk that Gail will give from Norm Abramson, who couldn't make it, we will record ground motion across the fault from moderate and small earthquakes that by themselves will already help to improve ground motion models that are essential for earthquake engineering. So this is while we are waiting. There is a lot of data and a lot of work to do. Now, if we sit there, the idea is to have these observatories for decades, essentially supplementing. We want to put them on the ground, and then they will have to be absorbed by the regional networks and supplement the regional network. So eventually there will be large ruptures, and when that occurs, we will be able to see the final stage of some processes that are already observed, such as localization of the formation. But we cannot observe the final state of this with the regional network, which is relatively sparse. Temporal changes of seismic velocity, maybe episodic local failures, maybe long-range correlations along block boundaries, which are also faults that are not consistent with, let's say, perfect continuum mechanics. There are signals that already have been recorded on all of this, but they are sporadic, they are case studies, they are not robust, and this kind of observatory will really bring it to the next level. So that's why in the last stage. Now, during Rupture, we will really get revolutionary data for the first time ever in the world. We will get full evolving dynamic strain field, both shear and dilatational. I highlight the dilatational, and I'll talk about it more, in other talks later in the meeting, because it's a signal that must exist in brittle failure, but it's not recorded in the far field. And it has essential implication for the physics of earthquake rupture. We'll be able to get dynamic and static stress and strain drop, dynamic capture width and velocity in situ, not from far, slip velocity, including their variation in space and time, seismic energy flux, PGA, PGV, PGD, which are essential for ground motion models. Again, Gail will talk about it more. And then, while this is not our goal for early warning, this will provide robust, the earliest early warning signals, because these stations sit right on the fault. They will augment the early warning network, and they will also provide robust information on directivity, just because of the way it is. Okay. Now, post-rupture, there will be detailed transition from the seismic to the seismic deformation, because we are sitting right there, including, again, volumetric components that are probably play a key role, underappreciated in physics of rupture, and the evolving post-seismic fields of the very active flows. Some surprise discoveries, and I can speculate on a few, but I will not to save time. They are surprised. Why are they surprised? Well, we don't know, but they we don't know what to expect. It's an unexplored environment, but experience indicates that every time you put some sort of detailed network, there are some surprise discoveries. So they are kind of here. Now, that doesn't look either. Can you move one?
Down.
I see. It does move. Okay. So to put this in context, the utility of this observatory in the long time while it's sitting there and waiting for big earthquakes, I want to show you a cousin initiative that I'll also talk about a little bit more later in the meeting, referred to as Coalition for Earthquake Resilience California. SCEC is the acronym. So we would like to develop a coalition of organizations working together to improve the resilience of earthquakes in California. And the hallmark of this SCEC initiative are three components. The first one is to construct better Earth model, multi-scale Earth models using this near-field sensor. So here is a new version of RuFZO that extends to Northern California, includes Hayward faults. And this is preliminary. Of course, we haven't decided anything. We want to talk about how to do this best. But anyway, this is the first ingredient in SCEC. Then once we have these detailed multi-scale models, the second ingredient would be to use cybershape type simulations to calculate radiation, simulate radiations from the faults to sites of interest, to big cities, to critical sites, over frequency range that is of interest to engineer, which is not possible with the existing crustal models. So we really want to go maybe up to 10 hertz. And we need the detailed fault zone structure for this, which will be illustrated in the next slide also. And then using this simulated wave field, we want to simulate the response of structures. So this is another initiative. I'm just making the point that RuFZO is crucial. Getting this multi-scale structural model is essential for doing anything else, beyond that. Now, the importance of having detailed fault zone model for the seismic wave field is illustrated in these figures here. On the top, we see results from a paper that was published earlier this year by Yehuda and Olsen. And at the bottom, work in progress plus poster by the group of Alice Gabriel. And what you see here, these are simulations of single earthquake ruptures, actually the Ridgecrest earthquake. And there's a comparison between what you get. I'll start with this paper, what you get on the left when we just use the CVM. This is PGV, this is PGA. On the right, the simulation include detailed low velocity zones around the fault that were obtained by dense arrays that were deployed after the Ridgecrest earthquake. And you may not see, this is quite different in detail. This is PGV, this is PGA, but the difference is illustrated here on the right, where there's a log of the ratios of the results with and versus without the detailed structure. So you may be surprised by incorporating small scale structure, you affect the wave field everywhere, all the way down to Los Angeles basin. And it's not surprising because the wave fields that get out of the fault zone is different already. So of course it will be different. And this is also illustrated very nicely in these results that are part of a poster now that is presented in this meeting. And again, you see, in this case, you see ratios of PGV after the 6.4 earthquakes, the 7.1 in models that include or do not include the detailed fault zone structure. So the difference is very, very big. near fault wave produced. Okay, so I think I'm getting to my last slide in this introduction that I was asked just recently to give. It was not part of the original plan. So RuFZO is already, the ideas have been kicking around for a couple of years. We now have a very nice committee that includes Ahmed, Elbanna, Ashley Griffith, Chris Johnson, Daniel Fragman, Frank Vernon, Gail Atkinson, Jamie Steidel, Jean-Philippe Abuak, Peter Scher, Ramon Aerosmith, and Roger Bingham. On the right, you have a list of the workshops that we're taking up to present. Most of them are virtual. We really started this during the pandemic. So until this year, everything was virtual. We get hundreds of people, and the workshops all of these recordings are available on RuFZO website. That you can get the address from Casey if you want. The meeting today is convened, as you know, by Ahmed, Elbanna, Gail Atkinson, and Peter Scher. And with this, I'll stop and I can take questions if there are any.
I think it's with all that richness, maybe we keep questions on this for the discussion session and get kicked off with the talks. Is that okay with you, Yehuda?
Everything is okay with me.
Do we have a quick basic question?
I'm glad that Maggie is here, and I would just like to ask her if you have any general recommendation on how to move forward.
Sure. So I'm Maggie Benoit. I'm the program director for the mid-scale research infrastructure 2 program in for the geosciences, but I also am a SAGE Engage program director. So a few thoughts here. I would encourage you to think very succinctly about what science questions you really want to address with this infrastructure. You're going to have to lead with the science. This is the science that we really want to do, and this is the infrastructure that we really need to answer those questions. Without that infrastructure, those questions could not be answered. You really need to start from the science side rather than the infrastructure side, because you're going to have to justify that infrastructure with the science. Be very crystal clear about each piece of infrastructure and how that is necessary to address those science goals. Also, be very clear about how you're leveraging existing infrastructure, existing facilities. That's the first thing you're going to be asked, right? We already have a huge geophysics facility that is almost 20% of all of the Division of Earth Sciences budget. So how are you going to leverage the existing facility? And how are the current offerings and capabilities of that facility not enough for you to address your science questions? It's really important. NSF looks at different parts of these sorts of things in very discrete pots. So the mid-scale 1 and mid-scale 2 infrastructure programs only fund construction and acquisition. So we will buy the equipment, you can put it in place, but that's it. If you want to move it, that has to be funded elsewhere. Additionally, in order to have successful mid-scale 1 and 2 proposals, you need an operations plan. So when you're submitting your proposal, that operations plan has to be solid. If you're going to need operations money from the Division of Earth Sciences, you need permission from our division director. You need a written letter saying our division director will commit those operations funds to the project. So while I'm a geophysicist and all this is really cool to me, you have to convince hydrologists, paleontologists, why this is necessary. So keep that in mind, that whatever science questions you are going to come up with, that you can sell them to non-specialists. That operations plan has been a really big sticking point for many of our projects. You need to have a good sense of how much your operations are going to cost. Are there partnering organizations that are going to support the operations costs? Okay, that's great, but can you get letters of commitment from them to support the operations? So really be thinking very discreetly between the construction and acquisition part and the operations part. So those are my guiding thoughts. I'm happy to answer questions, but these are things that tend to trick up different groups that are trying to get these projects going forward. So happy to answer questions. And I'll be here for about an hour. But then once you get into the sort of ideation part of this, I should step out.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? You know, for us, community building is also very important, but for a call like this, which is very focused on infrastructure and operations,
Yeah.
like, you know, what chunk should we commit to the next generation of geoscientists who are going to work? And I mean,
That's a great question. Great question. So for these proposals, you need to demonstrate that a large community of people are going to use it, that there has been significant consensus building in the community about like, this is what we as a community really want. So proposals should really demonstrate that. The proposals themselves have a education and running participation component. They're a little bit weird. Those components are just about training the next generation of facility employees, facility designers, instrumentation designers. It's not to train students how to use the data. There's a little nuance there. So it's people who want to be like Glenn and Bob in the future who run facilities. That's kind of the. Trained to be the next generation of Bob Keys with Glenn.
okay.
However, the operations component, eventually, right when you get to an operations stage, you absolutely want to be thinking about community engagement, how you're going to train the students to use it. I'm assuming there's a big data component, right? You want to be able to train students to do that. So, again, NSF is weird, right? We have different pots for different things, but you could be thinking about community building in the preparation sphere, the construction sphere, and the operation sphere. Yeah.
So can you recommend a few additional programs, some sort of sequencing for this before this is really going to be a scale infrastructure? Or there's another program that might find parts of it or components of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is a new mechanism to put together a I forget the exact name of it, but it's a preparatory work proposal up to $200,000 for these kinds of community building activities. And so I would recommend Eva Zanzorkia. Well, I think Eva's conflicted right now with SCEC, but just you could have a general conversation with her about that. So that will be supported out of one of the core science programs. We also can support other types of workshops. So anyone can always submit a workshop proposal. Again, probably geophysics is the right move for that, and talking to Eva or other program officers in that program about that. And there may be additional opportunities in the future for trying to bring more communities together to be competitive for these kinds of proposals. So for example, the engineering directorate had a dear colleague letter that asked for proposals to kind of support community building activities. There could potentially be something in the future for the geosciences. I'm not sure, but that would be something you could be on the lookout for.
Oh, we've got another question.
Good question. Historically, I think of monitoring as being a dirty word.
Yeah. Yes.
If that's still true, how do we structure this so that people don't say, "Oh, we're just monitoring"?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So Eclipse, right? In the agency, monitoring is kind of a dirty word, right? So that's one of the reasons I focused in my initial comments around having science questions that you can address. The way that we sort of see it is that you can collect data for a certain amount of time to address those science questions. It may be a decade or more, but you really need to define your operations period around those science questions. After that, the agency sort of sees the operations of those stations in service to monitoring and not to answering those core questions. So when you're thinking about this, think about how long do we need to collect that data before it starts to get into that monitoring kind of phase. So if you think about recently the EarthScope MREFC, our big data collection program, those stations stayed in place for 2 years, right? The seismic stations were in place for 2 years because there was some set of science questions that said, okay, that would be enough data. That's not enough data for all questions, but that was the way the project was defined. Certain groups came in and adopted those stations so that they could be in place for monitoring for longer periods. So again, the monitoring goes to what types of questions are you trying to address? Once you've addressed those, then NSF sees, okay, if you're leaving that infrastructure in place, it's in service to monitoring and not to that core science. And I know it's hard to kind of, as a seismologist, right? That's kind of tough for us to. There's a lot of there's a lot of mixture between sort of core science and monitoring, but we got to draw the line somewhere, and so that's how we do it at the agency.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Maggie. Thanks for the question.